So I've been kicking something around in my head. I had heard that HH Holmes was the first documented serial killer in the United States. And I didn't give it too much thought at first, but then I decided that no, that wasn't true. And I brought y'all some evidence. I went down a rabbit hole and brought back stuff so you don't have to do it. And the thing that set me off was the quote from an early newspaper that said, one of the most diabolical and prolific serial killers that existed in early America. Well, one of seems to me to indicate that there was more. But back in the way back, newspapers didn't have the resources of the internet and the smartphone, and police were still working with what they had. And in some cases, all they had to go on was a physical description of who they thought to be the killer. And in some cases, they didn't even get an artist rendering or any sort of drawing. They had a written description that they handed around. And it could be anybody. But the public was fascinated, so the newspapers did their best to try to get all these things covered. Because I think that way before you and I got interested in this, people have been looking at serial killers for a very long time. There's also mention of female serial killers, of whom I found several. And they mostly used poison. Poison was, it seemed to be a ladies' game, except for there's one in here that I'm going to tell you about. A man who was also a poisoner, but he's kind of the exception. And this contrasts with modern serial killer demographics and raises some, interesting stuff about the social climate of the time. Sometimes women would give their husbands what we call inheritance potion just to get out from under their cruelty, get themselves some freedom, themselves out from under some abuse. But we're not talking about them. Even though they were just as wrong, they weren't serials. So let me tell you about the Harp brothers. They were considered to be the earliest documented ones, and they operated between 1794 and 1799. They are believed to have at least a 39 body count, although it could possibly be more than 50. They just couldn't remember. Their acts were apparently motivated by just bloodlust. There wasn't any financial gain in this, and they used methods like slamming heads against trees and disembowelment. They were known for a signature corpse disposal where they weighed down the bodies with stones, but they had split the chest open. So even back in the day, they knew that even a weighted body will rise when the gases happen. So I'm kind of thinking this was not their first rodeo. They were loyalist sympathizers during the American Revolution, later becoming outlaws and river pirates. And the pirates even had a quote about them that said, their level of brutality is uncalled for. So yeah, when a pirate disses you, that's kind of a big thing. Micaiah Harp was known as Big, and Wiley Harp was known as Little. So Big was shot and decapitated while he was still conscious, and his head was displayed as a warning. The area where this happened is still known as Harp's Head. Little Harp was later executed by hanging, and his head was also displayed. They were married. They had wives. And after being freed from their husbands, it's said that they went on to lead relatively normal lives. I think relatively is a big word in that sentence, because how are you going to go on normal after what you've been through? That brings us to Lydia Sherman, or the Derby Poisoner. She was active between 1864 and 1871. She was born Lydia Danbury, and she did poisoned 3 husbands and 8 innocent children. 8 kids. Oh, she was entrusted with the care of 2 extra kids. 6 of the 8 were her own children. Yeah, but she only got busted on second-degree murder in 1872. She was locked up, but 5 years into her sentence, she feigned an illness. She did a oh woe is me thing, and during that time they were trying to care for her, trying to figure out what was wrong. She escaped. She resurfaced later as a housekeeper in Providence, Rhode Island, for a wealthy widower. Imagine that. Nobody knew anything about her past at that time, but she was recaptured, returned to prison, and she died of cancer within a couple years. On to the Bender family, or they were called back then the Bloody Benders. They were active between 1870 and 1873, and they had a little inn and overnight stop in Kansas. And authorities had found the bodies of 15 people with crushed skulls and cut throats. They were buried within a couple miles of the Bender property. The family consisted of John, his wife Elvira, also seen as Elmira depending on the source, their children John Jr. and daughter Kate. Kate was said to be used as bait because she's kind of pretty, kind of young. You know what they did. Yeah, using your own daughter as bait. You know, what the Benders had was, like I said, a little travel lodge, and it was along the Osage Mission Trail. And that was a north-south travel route that was pretty busy. And they offered overnight accommodations and supplies to travelers. Yeah, but you checked in and you didn't check out. They were doing it for money. And, yeah, I guess the fees for the overnight and the money off the store just wasn't enough. So there you go. Thomas W. Piper, the Belfry Butcher. He was a respected church member at a Baptist church, and they tagged him for 2 murders, but newspaper and police sources at the time say there was probably 4. But what he did that got him caught, oh my word, this is hard to talk about. His victim was a 5-year-old girl, and he kind of separated her from her friends, telling her he would take her up to the belfry, and that's in the bell tower, and they could look at the pigeons. And that's where her body was found. She had been beaten and brutalized, and you know what that means, because we can't say it on YouTube. But yeah, she was 5 years old. Jesse Pomeroy, or the Boy Fiend, was active in 1874, and he was one of the youngest people in Massachusetts history to be convicted of murder. His activity started at the tender age of 14. Yeah. His victims, all stabbed, were younger children, 7, 8, as young as 5, and all stabbed. Now, how he got caught is he had left one of his victims for dead, and they had actually survived. And this person, this young boy, saw Jesse out and around and claimed, yeah, pointed him out, said, "That's the boy that hurt me." And he was caught, and he confessed, and he received a death warrant. At the time, oh, yeah, they could have executed him by hanging, but the governor was having none of that. He was 14, and even back in the day, they realized that. Eventually, after back and forth and lots of votes and all that stuff. He had been locked up for a real long time when his sentence was commuted to life in prison. He was very, very old when he was finally transferred to a place for the criminally insane where he lived until 1932. Got a nice long life, even if it was somewhat confined, but he was afforded a privilege his victims didn't get. Sarah Jane Robinson, or known as the Boston Borgia, or the Poison Fiend, because back in Victorian times everything had to have 3 names, also known as. She poisoned 11 people, including friends, family, relatives, and acquaintances, all to collect the insurance money. That was her shtick. The Servant Girl Annihilator, and y'all will find I did a whole article, and it's on my Mysteries and Crimes playlist, but it's fascinating and it's a local story to me. The Servant Girl Annihilator was active in 1885 in Austin, Texas, with at least 9 victims, and that case was left open. The doer was never caught. My money would be on Nathan Elgin, but listen to the whole story and you can decide for yourself. Belle Guinness, 1884 to 1909. She is said to have murdered up to 42 people. Yeah, also for insurance, she killed husbands, children's, boyfriends. She was the sweetheart killer, the sweetheart poisoner, and she collected her victims by putting ads in the Lonely Hearts section of the newspaper saying that she was a wealthy widow seeking companionship. Yeah, she was. She was seeking another dollar. Minnie Wallace Walkup, 1885 to 1900. She poisoned people. She was charming and got with older men and got them to change their will, and all of a sudden, what do you know? Poor thing died. The Kelly family was active in 1887. It was a family unit. William, Kate, Bill, and Kit. And this is another one. They was killing travelers. They had a stopover on their ranch, and they would use a trap door to put people through the floor. I guess they sat them down for dinner or something, and then, yeah, pulled the trap door, and they found 11 people with busted skulls in the basement. How do you get away with that? I mean, why would anybody come in your lodging and check in with that kind of smell? I don't know. Even quicklime won't do the whole job. But they got 11 of them just for the money. Thomas Neal Cream, 1892. And this one, he is a real piece of shit. He is also known as the Lambeth Poisoner. I tell you, we'd get to a man who was a poisoner. This is him. He was a Scottish-Canadian medical doctor and serial poisoner. He got his victims with strychnine. He had murdered up to 10 people in 3 countries, mostly targeting lower-class women and sex workers and pregnant women seeking illegal abortion. He was convicted and sentenced to death and was hanged in England in 1892. And a popular rumor started around him by the hangman, James Billington. He claimed that Cream's last words were, "I am Jack the," and then it stopped. Yeah, a seeming confession to being Jack the Ripper. However, Billington is the only source for this alleged statement. Nobody else heard it. The official records show that Cream was incarcerated. Yeah, they had his ass locked up in Illinois during the Ripper murders. So, yeah, just an interesting side note. Now we're on to our rock star, HH Holmes, 1888 to 1894. He's always been referred to, not always, I shouldn't say always, he is often referred to as the first American serial killer. But we just went through a whole list and he's not, so that's too bad. Mr. H, you have been dethroned. It is said that our Mr. Holmes has killed between 20 to 200 people in his specially designed murder castle. I've also looked at plans and blueprints, so much as can be reliably stated here, of his murder castle, and it was not as complicated as some sources have made it out to be. He was said at the time that he was hiring and firing contractors to come and work on the building because he didn't want any one set of people to know the layout of the castle. This, in my opinion, is just not true. What was happening, in my opinion, again, was that he was hiring these people and not paying them because he was a swindler of the worst ilk. And they would work for a time and realize they weren't going to get paid, and they would walk off the job. He would go to another contractor, make a small token deposit, and say that the rest would be paid when the work was completed. Well, people don't do that anymore, and he just couldn't be trusted anyway. So, yeah, and then they would not get paid, and they would walk off as well. So there was not as much to that murder castle thing as I think has been presented. So anyway, Mr. Holmes, dethroned. Bye-bye. And we're on to Jane Toppin, or Jolly Jane. And she was operating within a year or two of the same time. Her timeline isn't real solid, but I see reports going back as early as 1893 and continuing to 1902. She was a trained nurse, known for her pleasant disposition, therefore the name Jolly Jane. She poisoned 31 people in her care. She was a home health care nurse, and she would give an elderly person a dose of poison, and then she would crawl in bed with them and kiss them as the soul left the body. Oh, Jane, I don't think therapy would have helped. But anyhow, I just had to debunk that little rumor for y'all. So HH Holmes was not the first, and we've got a whole string of people coming out ahead of him. Just saying. That's it for me this week. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time.